Hello and you're welcome to the Indo Politics. I'm Tabitha Monahan and today I'm joined by my colleagues Fionnán Sheahan and John Downing in what has turned into an incredibly eventful 48 hours in the presidential election. Fionnán, it's almost an avalanche of politics that has happened in the last 2 days. And I actually don't know really where to start with you with this because there's so many different aspects of this now. So maybe bring us back to Saturday and the story that you wrote about Jim Gavin.
So we're going back into the past of Jim Gavin, presidential election candidate, which is to be expected when you're running for head of state. Jim Gavin used to have an apartment in Dublin's north inner city, which he owned, lived there originally, then rented it out. A tenant who was there from May 2007 to May 2009. When he left, a standing order wasn't cancelled by the bank properly, which meant that Jim Gavin continued to be paid rent by this tenant even though he had left. The tenant discovers this after a while. This is in the pre-mobile phone banking days. You're not really checking your bank accounts all the time. Gets on to Jim Gavin and goes, listen, there's been a mistake here by the bank. I've paid you too much rent. Can you give it back to me? He has difficulty getting hold of Jim Gavin, ends up ringing him multiple occasions, emailing him, sending him letters, calling out to his parents' house, sending solicitors' letters, and it's kind of told by Jim Gavin, oh yeah, I'll sort that out, and then it never happens. So ultimately there was €3,300 involved there of overpaid rent, and there's a dispute. Come forward now. We'll learn about this in recent weeks. Obviously have to go off and check it. Also check what exactly was Jim Gavin's status in terms of properties and stuff like that, because we don't know anything about this guy. Mm-hmm. Unlike every other politician in the country, councillors, MEPs, TDs, senators, who all have to sign a register of interest, which is basically a declaration of your assets every year that you were in politics. There's no such thing available for Jim Gavin.
They've also been around the block enough that a lot of people have looked into this stuff already.
Yeah. Where Jim Gavin was brand new to politics. So took a lot of research in terms of the land registry, the registry of deeds, the dental registry office, South Dublin County Council, court service, Irish Times and Irish Independent property supplements, just to draw together. So I was able to get a picture, a timeline. Okay, these are the significant events in the Gavin's life, the Gavin family's life, the marriage, the birth of the kids and so on, and these are where they were at the time. So what came together was they basically moved house as the family was getting bigger. This is in this 2008, 2009 period where they basically moved into their forever home out in Rathfarnham while they're still leasing this property inside in Dublin's north inner city. And it seemed there was a suggestion basically that they were having financial difficulties as well, that they were overstretched. That kind of matched the picture that was there. They were down to, Jim Gavin was down to one family, one income family, a public sector salary. So it became apparent, is he overstretched here? Went to Fianna Fáil after conducting the due diligence and all that, put a timeline together for them, details of it and so on and so forth. And expected to kind of get back an answer that was either no comment or lo and behold, a political party might actually give you an honest answer and say, yes, it did happen. Instead, we got back a reply on Friday night saying, Jim Gavin has no recollection of this whatsoever. He's checked his records from 16 years ago and there's nothing there to suggest there was anything wrong here at all. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Which is an extraordinary thing to say because you're considering it's over €3,000 worth of rent that he shouldn't have had. He's saying that he doesn't remember it after 16 years, which doesn't wash in a political campaign. Yeah,
you better be right. So we then had a difficulty because then we're second guessing ourselves. Are we absolutely certain? So we were happy that the former tenant was somebody of integrity, credibility, and that the information that he'd provided, which included dates and addresses and so on and so forth, when we checked them out, they did match up. So we ran the story. But that took a bit of deliberation now because you're given the libel laws in this country. The onus was now back on us, the Irish Independent, as a newspaper, to print this because ultimately we were getting a rebuttal here, basically saying, no, don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So lengthy discussions with the editor-in-chief, Cormac Burke, who ultimately said, look, this guy is running for head of state, President of Ireland. There's a public interest here. We're satisfied with our information and we're running it. And that effectively, if Fianna Fáil tried to call our bluff, well, we called the bluff back. And then we saw that things started to unravel then on Sunday on the Week in Politics interview with Anya Lawler, where he was quizzed very extensively about this issue and wasn't holding to the line from Friday night. Instead was saying, if this happened, I'm sorry that it happened. I'm gathering the data. I'm looking into it. It just wasn't sustainable. It was quite clear the story was unravelling here before us.
I was watching that, as well as I'm sure most people who are working in politics was watching that debate on Sunday. And I thought it was extraordinary that he seemed actually quite unprepared for that answer. He wasn't giving an answer that I felt he was confident in, let alone anybody else could be confident in the answer that he gave. You had already asked this question on Friday. Like you said, it kind of started to change by Sunday. What did you make of that? Was that political inexperience? What did you think of that?
He seemed to be falling back on this thing that, look, like many other people, we fell into financial difficulty during the crash. And you're kind of going, okay, that happened to a lot of people, but there's a specific issue here that you're not answering. And again, you know, there was kind of answers there. You weren't really getting the full picture and ultimately didn't seem to appreciate. You're running for very, very high office here. You have to be transparent. And ultimately you're in the middle of a campaign where you're going to keep getting asked these questions. So you'd want to have a very firm answer. So I suppose that was in contrast with the controversies that Heather Humphreys and Catherine Connolly have faced so far, where they have stuck to their guns. They have stated their position and they haven't really resiled from those. And yet we were seeing here that Jim Gavin was moving. I saw him at a doorstep, which is basically when he came out, a doorstep is a media opportunity where basically media ask you questions. He came out of the debate, seemed to be on his own with nobody in Fianna Fáil around, standing before a bunch of microphones being asked questions. He just looked like a deflated man. He looked beaten, because there'd also been an opinion poll that morning, Sunday Independent Ireland Thinks, which had him on 15%, down from 20 the previous occasion, coming in third place, well behind Heather Humphreys, way behind Catherine Connolly. This was turning into a two-horse race, and Jim Gavin was third.
Yeah, and I remember a few weeks ago, Fionnán, you and I were in the kitchen, we were having our lunch and we were discussing the different political scandals that had happened throughout different presidential elections. Did you think that this was going to be one of those when you were writing that story? Did you think that by Sunday night he was going to withdraw from the election and his name still remain on the ballot?
Certainly not. I mean, there was no question in my mind. It was actually our colleague Kevin Doyle said to me Sunday at 3 p.m. He said, this guy could pull out. And I was going, you're crazy. People don't pull out of elections. But Jim Gavin's not a politician. You know, so that's what we had to bear in mind there. So I certainly didn't see it go down that route. I don't really pay attention when there's good or bad being said on social media about a story, because that's just people weighing in whatever their political ideology is. But I was seeing that it was getting traction, it was getting out there, and there was people talking about it. So clearly he had a difficulty. We also weren't getting any calls from Fianna Fáil or Jim Gavin or a solicitor, because this is the great concern that we have in our world on Saturday to say this is wrong, that's wrong, we want this clarified. Nothing. So it was quite clear to me that, okay, we're fairly solid, we're happy with our story, and nobody is coming back claiming that there's anything wrong here. And then by Sunday you were seeing the situation unravelling. And there was nothing coming from Fianna Fáil either in terms of a clarificatory statement, anything to update it. I was back on to Fianna Fáil then yesterday saying, okay, I now have a solicitor's letter that was sent to 3 different locations, to parents' house, his workplace, and another address. We're running that. Do you want to come back and clarify any of that? What's going on with this urgent matter that he's now addressing? And there was nothing happening. So, yeah, while I was shocked at 10:31 last night to see that there was an email of Jim Gavin dropping out of the race, maybe in hindsight we shouldn't really have been, because I think this was a flawed misadventure from the start.
John, Fionnán saying, maybe shocked, but maybe not entirely surprised, really, when you look back at it. I think there was a particular sensitivity in relation to this story because of the context in which it is happening. A housing crisis. A landlord is able to take or keep €3,000 that wasn't theirs and not give it back. So I think it landed in a particular way, whatever about the presidential election, but because of the housing crisis. Were you shocked at Jim Gavin's decision to withdraw?
I was very surprised. It's without precedent. Yeah. There was, quite frankly, a sort of squalid nature to this controversy. If, for example, he owed $3,500 to a lending agency, a mortgage provider, something like that, if it was a question of a bad debt, that would be one thing. It wouldn't be helpful, but it would hardly be the end of the world. The real difficulty was his treatment of somebody who was in a very comparable position in life, as in trying to make ends meet, trying to get on the property ladder himself, and obviously trying to, get on with the business of life. It reminds us again that Jim Gavin wasn't a first cousin or a 31st cousin of a politician. That if you look at some of the wars, literally sometimes, that politicians have come through, the immediate comparison was in 1990, Brian Lenihan Sr., when he was basically found to have lied repeatedly to the entire Irish nation. He's sacked from government, he's sacked from his position as Taoiseach, Deputy Prime Minister, yet he still manages to get a record vote because he just soldiers on. Had Jim Gavin, last night when this bombshell landed, prior to that, had he gone and looked at his options, he could have come straight out and done what we call a Ben Dunn, going back to Ben Dunn in the early 90s. Just tell him everything, but tell it in the way that you're human, that it was a difficult time in your life, that you mishandled it, it was wrong then, it's wrong now, you're going to make handsome recompense and carry on. You never know in politics, but you don't. Politicians don't walk away in the way that Jim Gavin does, reminding us Jim Gavin was never and will never be a politician.
Yeah, there is this issue about you're always going to get hit with a controversy in a presidential election. You have to be out ahead of it. Or when it comes at you, you got to be completely upfront on it. Sorry, no, but that statement from that was issued by the Fianna Fáil party on Friday night was nowhere near coming forward with all of the facts.
It compounded all the difficulties.
And I want to pick up on that because what we're seeing now on Monday is actually a number of senior Fianna Fáil members who are coming out on the media to talk about this now. So we had Jack Chambers, who was the Director of Elections, Deputy Leader of Fianna Fáil, was the person who was on the phones ahead of the nomination or during the nomination process, trying to shore up support for Jim Gavin within the parliamentary party to get him across the line. Again, like I said, leading the election campaign for Jim Gavin. He has pointed to the first statement that Jim Gavin released, or that Fianna Fáil released on behalf of Jim Gavin, as Fionnán said, on the Friday, saying that he didn't know about this. Jack Chambers essentially saying that that's what the party were told. And maybe, and he didn't say this, but alluded to potentially that Jim Gavin misled the party, and that by Saturday that evidence was brought to the party by this tenant, able to prove, I have documents to show that this is true, and that Jack Chambers said Jim Gavin has made the right decision by stepping away. An extraordinary thing for the Director of Elections.
Yeah, again, utterly unprecedented. We're in a situation here where it brings us back to what Billy Kelleher, the other potential Fianna Fáil candidate, MEP from Cork, he has called for a fuller examination of just what the process, the vetting process, the examination of a potential candidate actually is. Now, presumably, there are questions put about your personal finances and your past personal finances. Presumably, but how do I know? you would imagine there would be searches done on courts, on registered judgments, bad debts, things like that. Admittedly, it could be difficult for the parliamentary party or for the party, generally speaking, party HQ and the leadership, to get as deep as this and find out this case about his bad relationship with a tenant quite some years ago. So they were arguably reliant upon his complete disclosure and truthfulness in that regard. But God knows, all of what I have said is sort of just reasonable conjecture. So certainly Fianna Fáil have quite a deal of explaining to do as to what kind of due diligence they went through to vet a potential candidate for the highest office in the land from the biggest party in the land.
Yeah, all we were doing here was looking at publicly available records. Fine, with separate information that was came to us from somebody who had interacted with him. But even the publicly available information told you things that would have raised question marks. And it doesn't seem, I just wonder, were Fianna Fáil completely starstruck here? This process seems to be rushed. They seem to be desperate to get anybody but Bertie. And they wanted...
Or one of their own.
Or one of their own. They wanted somebody from the outside who they wanted to parachute in and tell us this person will be great.
All of which
didn't seem to raise any questions.
By the way, because they wanted a kind of different story, not an examination of Fianna Fáil, which basically, one way and another, has been involved in government since 2016. And we still have the same bugbears, particularly of housing, also health and lack of investment in services and so on.
John mentioned due diligence and whether or not, let's say, Jim Gavin flagged this with the party in advance. But also I wonder, because of Jim Gavin's statement, he said, this isn't in keeping with my character, that I made a mistake. This is having an impact on my family. I want to kind of go back to them. We know, we are blue in the face saying this in the podcast, that this campaign turns into a blood sport. It becomes personal because the role of the president isn't about policy. It's not about housing. It's not about healthcare. It's about who you are and whether or not an individual voter likes the cut of your jib. Do you think that the Fianna Fáil party properly prepared a non-politician for this campaign? Did they not explain to him that this is potentially where this is going to go? Like we saw again, this isn't the first time that Jim Gavin has spoken about the impact of this on his family. We had those malicious smears, I think as he described it, that was online about his family, and he decided to contact Meta, Facebook, TikTok, etc. and have them taken down. Do you think he was just wholly unprepared by the party that he decided to run with?
I don't think he was suited to the role that Fianna Fáil were running him for here. I think if there was at some point, for example, a directly elected mayor of Dublin, and they were looking to put somebody into a role like that, and they could come along and go, look, this guy has accomplished a lot. He's got a high profile in Dublin. He's a very organised and meticulous kind of person. He'd fit in here. That's grand. But this wasn't that role. This was to be head of state. If you look at his past in the GA world, he wasn't someone who was a larger-than-life major personality in the GAA world. He was quite happy being low profile behind the scenes, could be taciturn, defensive, in terms of any media interactions, wasn't known to say a whole lot. At the same time, people very much admired him for the work that he did and his achievements in that world. He'd also his public service with the Defence Forces. He also had worked on the Citizens' Assembly and North East Inner City Task Force. So he had a CV. That was great, but did the CV match the job? This is not to denigrate Jim Gavin in any way and his accomplishments in life. I just don't think he was suited, and he certainly wasn't suited for the sort of campaign that this is, which is very outwardly focused. We were watching him in interviews saying he didn't seem to have the depth of knowledge across the wide range of issues that you have to discuss here. He was pretty wooden as well. So while Fianna Fáil were turning around and going, well, sure, anybody can become president, you're kind of going, well, no, they can't actually, because you can't just invent a politician from scratch.
Yeah, it was, and that even goes back to a number of Fianna Fáil TDs who said to me after the nomination process, and a lot of them would have engaged with Jim Gavin in advance of that, and they said, look, we can see that he could be a good president, but whether or not he's a good candidate is a completely different kettle of fish altogether. And as we've seen, he wasn't able for that. John, we had one of the front pages of the paper in the days leading up to the process, the selection process, that the decision between Billy Kelleher or Jim Gavin would be a referendum on Micheál Martin's leadership. What do you think is the fallout now? Because really, Micheál Martin was the person who was pushing Jim Gavin forward. He was, as Fionnán said, the parachute candidate for Micheál Martin, Jack Chambers as his deputy, and the person who, to some, is assumed would take over from Micheál Martin as leader of the party. Has that gone to shreds now?
Well, to shreds, we will see in the coming days. It's certainly a huge reverse for Micheál Martin continuing as leader, and it is a considerable reverse for the potential Dauphin, the potential leader in waiting, Jack Chambers, both of whom their dabs are all over this one. They drove it. They delivered his candidature. They more or less drove it through the parliamentary party. At that, there was a strong vote for Billy Kelleher in spite of all of that. So that suggests there is unfinished business. It's not a happy ship. There will be an inquisition, an inquest into how Jim Gavin just suddenly came in on a whirlwind as the Fianna Fáil official candidate for the highest office in the land. And in that process, there will be an examination of the leadership of Micheál Martin and the roles of those close to him, including Jack Chambers and others at headquarters and on his advisory team. However, let's recall Micheál Martin has one very strong point in his favour at this. He is set to be Taoiseach until 2027. So if Micheál Martin digs his heels in and decides he is not going anywhere, it could be very difficult to shift him. It is also clear from the Fianna Fáil parliamentary party that their unhappiness is a kind of scattergun unhappiness. It's not based on single central failings. So, but all that being said, there are some pretty unhappy times coming up for the party, especially the parliamentary party.
And they're not unified behind one figure either.
Which you think is crucial?
Yeah, I think it helps. If
you're going to oust the leader, you should have a putative replacement.
Yeah, and at the moment, it was quite obvious that Micheál was lining up Jack Chambers as his successor. His role in this fiasco now calls that into question. Jim O'Callaghan has been the mover within the party over the last 12 months, particularly since he took over as Minister for Justice. He now has that status. But is he showing any signs of making moves against Micheál? Not really. He seems to be quite happy getting stuck into the role that he's in. So you can have sniping at Micheál Martin, but ultimately, a lot of this as well comes down to a party when it goes into government. It can be quite stretched, and the focus is on governmental matters, running the country. That's your job.
Absolutely.
And party affairs can take a back seat as a result, and they can get neglected. And this is just another example of that.
We've spent the guts of 20 minutes talking about a presidential candidate who's no longer a presidential candidate. We still have two left in the race. I think it's been.
We think we do. We've been in here 20 minutes. So we don't know.
What does this mean now for Catherine Connolly and Heather Humphreys? We saw on the poll Catherine Connolly is ahead. Heather Humphreys was only getting 60% of Jim Gavin's transfers. Is that enough? Really, I don't think it is, to push her ahead of Catherine. It's not. But what does that mean now that Jim is gone? What happens to both of these candidates?
Yeah, I think if that poll was basically showing, look, Jim Gavin is going to come third here, and this is the important thing is, right, where are his transfers going? So 60% were going to Heather Humphreys, 25% going to Catherine Connolly. That was keeping her ahead, and we played out the numbers, and the scenario was that Catherine Connolly was going to win. But it was narrow enough margin. You were kind of looking at going, well, Heather's had a bad couple of weeks. If she can improve a bit, you're also looking at support. It was going to swing now from Jim probably to Heather. But ultimately, you're looking at that now going, okay, how many of those voters are now going to actually come out? Is there an incentive here now for Fianna Fáil voters who are being loyal to the party to come out and back Jim Gavin as the nominated candidate? Are they now going to come out and back Heather Humphreys? Is Micheál Martin going to recommend they do so, for example? So that's all kind of up in the air. I don't think this scenario necessarily suits Heather Humphreys, because she had that battle with Jim Gavin to be ahead on the establishment government side. She was winning that, which meant that she was going to get a slingshot of transfers from Jim Gavin. That doesn't really happen now, although he's still on the ballot paper. So it probably is more advantageous to Catherine Connolly.
But John, we have, the guts of 2 weeks left of this campaign.
2.5 weeks.
A lot can change in the space of 48 hours.
Well, given what we've seen, yes, lots can change. And are we going to learn more about skeletons in other cupboards? Well, let's see. The difficulty for, I think, Heather Humphreys is indifference. The old cliche. The voters were already struggling to contain their indifference. Now they just don't care at all. 44% of people turned out in 2018, now largely based on the assumption that Michael D was going to skate home, and he duly did. However, you're looking at an election which, a starting point, half the voters just don't care and won't bother. I think Fionnán summed it up there in just the neatest phrase of all. This development does not suit Heather Humphreys, who's now in a heck of a fight.
Fionnán, very briefly, there's a big thing happening on Tuesday, a little thing, Budget 2026. Has been overshadowed, I think, by the presidential campaign and what has happened with Jim Gavin now. What are we expecting from the budget? We know that it's going to be tight. It's not necessarily going to be popular. Do you even think tomorrow, ministers will be out doing their different media appearances? Do you even think that the budget will be overshadowed by what's happened today?
Oh yeah, look, they have to come out and sell the budget. It's the annual set piece. What we are expecting is plenty of lectures about, we need to rein things in a bit, we're spending too much, and there are threats on the horizon. The cost of living giveaways are going to be gone. We're told there's going to be targeted measures. Not a whole lot going to happen on the income tax side, and going to be a greater emphasis on capital. So we're expecting, they're going to be talking about value for money and so on. What we're also looking from these guys is a plan. You're in for 5 years. This is not a year by year thing. They haven't really set out their projections of where they see income and expenditure going over the next 5 years, and what they actually plan to get achieved during that timescale. That's kind of what we're looking for tomorrow. From tomorrow. And
you might tell us where all our coverage is going to be on the budget, because we're doing a few different bits.
Yeah. So, if you like video format, the Indo Politics live Budget 2026 analysis, I'll be here in this studio, not with the two of you, with Kevin Doyle and Katie Byrne as the before, during and after the budget speech. Obviously, it'll be live on the Irish Independent website, and then across all of our platforms all day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and all the way through to the weekend. You won't be able to miss it.
Right. Fionnán, John, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm Tabitha Monahan, and thank you for joining us on the Indo Politics. You can subscribe to the Irish Independent YouTube channel to follow all the latest videos and coverage of Budget 2026 and, of course, the presidential election.